Have you ever wondered what it would be like to have everything money can buy, yet nothing that truly matters? When wealth becomes your identity, who remains when facade falls away? In a world that measures worth in dollars rather than character, is genuine connection even possible? We move through life wearing masks, some more elaborate than others. We present carefully curated versions of ourselves, hoping to be accepted, admired, desired. But what happens when a mask becomes so convincing that we forget who we are beneath it? And worse, what if we discover that the person we become is no longer someone we recognize? This is the story of a man who had everything yet nothing, of a woman who saw value where others saw only limitation, and of the journey that taught them both that the greatest wealth isn't counted in bank accounts, but in moments of genuine connection, when we are brave enough to be seen for who we truly are. Sometimes we must lose ourselves completely before we can find our way home. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to Love Crib, your ultimate destination for all things romances, connection, and heartfelt stories. I'm thrilled to have you here, sharing this amazing journey of exploring love in all its beautiful, complex, and magical forms. Whether you're a hopeless romantic, someone searching for relationship insights, or just love diving into heartwarming content, you're exactly where you need to be. If you're enjoying what you see, I'd be incredibly grateful if you could hit that subscribe button to stay connected with our Love Crib community. Drop a like to show some love, support, and motivation. Share this video with someone who might need a little romance in their life. Your support means the world to me and helps us continue creating content that celebrates love, connection, and the beautiful stories that bring us together. John Mills buttoned his worn flannel shirt, examining his reflection in the small bathroom mirror of his modest apartment. The transformation was complete. Designer suits and luxury watches exchanged for thrift store finds, his normally perfectly styled hair deliberately tousled. No one looking at him would guess he controlled Zenith Enterprises, a tech conglomerate worth billions. This double life hadn't been planned. It began as an experiment after a particularly painful breakup with a woman who'd been more interested in his bank account than him. That experience had planted a seed of doubt. Would anyone ever love him for who he was rather than what he owned? The deception started small, a weekend pretending to be an average guy at a coffee shop across town. It felt liberating to have conversations where no one knew his net worth or was trying to pitch him investment ideas. Soon, it became a refuge from his high-pressure existence. 3 days a week, he was simply John, a freelance graphic designer, making a modest living. On this particular Tuesday evening, John headed to his favorite neighborhood bar, the Rusty Nail. The unpretentious establishment had become his sanctuary, with its scarred wooden tables and eclectic clientele. "The usual, John?" asked Tony, the bartender who becomes something of a friend. "Thanks," John replied, settling onto his regular stool. As Tony slid a cold beer across the counter, the door opened and 2 women entered. The first woman caught his attention immediately. Tall, blonde, and striking, with a confident stride that commanded the room. The second was shorter, with warm brown eyes and chestnut hair that fell in natural waves around her shoulders. While less immediately eye-catching than her friend, there was something genuine in her smile that made John look twice. Tony nodded toward them. Becca and Mary, regulars on Tuesdays. Becca's the blonde, works in marketing at some fancy firm. Mary's a kindergarten teacher. Good people. John couldn't help stealing glances at Becca throughout the evening. When she approached the bar for another round, he gathered his courage. "First time here?" he asked, immediately regretting the cliché opener. Becca gave him a quick once-over, her gaze lingering on his worn jeans and modest watch. "No, we come here often. I haven't seen you around. I'm John. I usually sit at the bar." "Becca, that's Mary over there." She gestured her friend, who offered a friendly wave. Their conversation flowed surprisingly well. Becca was sharp and witty, though John noticed her interest seemed to wane when he mentioned his fictitious career. Still, by the end of the night, he'd secured her number and a tentative agreement to meet for coffee. Their coffee date was pleasant enough that it led to dinner the following week. John found himself increasingly drawn to Becca's ambitious nature and quick mind, though he noticed she often steered conversations toward money, how much things cost, which neighborhoods were expensive, which restaurants were exclusive. After several dates, John began to notice troubling patterns. Becca would suggest upscale restaurants, then express disappointment when he proposed more affordable alternatives. She made cutting remarks about his car, a deliberately average sedan he kept for his John persona. When he picked her up at her stylishly decorated apartment, she seemed embarrassed to introduce him to neighbors she encountered in the hallway. The breaking point came on their fifth date. Becca had been dropping hints about a new designer bag, and John had suggested he might get it for her birthday in a few months. She laughed, the sound surprisingly harsh. On your salary? That's sweet, but it costs more than you probably make in a month. Don't worry about it. My friend is dating a hedge fund manager. I'll drop hints to him instead. John felt as if he'd been doused with cold water. Would it matter if I could afford it? Of course it matters, Becca replied, seemingly oblivious to how her words landed. I have certain standards. I'm not getting any younger, and I need someone who can provide the lifestyle I want. So if I were wealthy, you'd feel differently about me? Becca sighed impatiently. Look, you're nice, but let's be real. I need someone ambitious, someone going places. You seem content with your little freelance gig and that apartment in that neighborhood. We're just not compatible long-term. Despite Becca's rejection, John couldn't quite extinguish his feelings for her. He found himself orchestrating accidental meetings, offering help when she mentioned work challenges, always hoping she might see beyond his fictional financial limitations. Each interaction left him more disheartened than the last, as Becca oscillated between dismissive politeness and outright disdain. Despite the rejection that should have ended things then and there, John found himself drawn back to the rusty nail the following Tuesday. He told himself it was a comfortable atmosphere, not the slim chance of seeing Becca again. When she walked in with Mary, his heart performed an embarrassing somersault. Becca acknowledged him with a cool nod before finding a table as far from the bar as possible. It was Mary who approached, her expression sympathetic. Hi, John. Heard things didn't work out with you and Becca. News travels fast, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Small bar, big gossip. Mary settled onto the stool next to his. For what it's worth, don't take it personally. Becca has her list of what she wants in a partner, and she doesn't deviate. Let me guess, wealthy, powerful, connected? Over the following months, John's Tuesday evenings developed a predictable pattern. He would arrive at the rusty nail, exchange pleasantries with Tony, and find himself in conversation with Mary while hoping to catch Becca's attention. Despite her clear disinterest, John couldn't help but try to impress her, sharing stories of graphic design projects he'd never actually worked on, hoping she might reconsider her assessment of him. You're a glutton for punishment, Tony observed one evening after Becca had cut John off mid-sentence to greet a well-dressed man who just entered. What do you see in her, anyway? John watched as Becca laughed at something the newcomer said, touching his arm with practiced charm. She's driven, ambitious. When she talks about her career, her eyes light up. There's a passion there. There's passion and there's ruthlessness, Tony replied. Just saying. But John persisted, finding excuses to insert himself into Becca's orbit. He'd offer to buy rounds when her friends were present, initiate conversations about topics he knew interested her, and position himself where she couldn't avoid seeing him. His behavior bordered on pathetic, and he knew it, but something about Becca's dismissal triggered a deep-seated need to prove himself worthy. His efforts earned him little more than condescending tolerance. Becca would accept his drinks with barely a thank you, cut conversations short, and make thinly veiled comments about men who couldn't take a hint. Each rejection should have dimmed his interest, but somehow it only intensified it. One particularly humiliating evening, John overheard Becca disparaging him to a friend. He just doesn't get it. I need someone established, not some struggling artist type. I mean, look at him. His watch probably came from a department store. The irony wasn't lost on John. The watch she mocked was actually a vintage timepiece worth more than her car, deliberately aged to look unremarkable. In his real life, he'd been featured in business magazines and had dated models and socialites. Yet here he was, pining after a woman who wouldn't give him the time of day because of a fiction he himself had created. While John's fixation on Becca continued, His friendship with Mary deepened. Unlike her friend, Mary showed genuine interest in his thoughts and experiences. She asked thoughtful questions about his supposed design work, shared amusing stories from her kindergarten classroom, and never made him feel lacking for his fictional modest income. "I admire what you do," she told him one evening as they shared a plate of nachos at the bar. "Teaching those kids must be rewarding." Mary smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It is, though the parents can be more challenging than the 5-year-old sometimes. But there's nothing like seeing a child's face when they finally understand something they've been struggling with. It's magic." John found himself increasingly looking forward to these conversations with Mary. She possessed a quiet confidence and warmth that made him feel genuinely seen, something he rarely experienced even in his real life, where people were often too intimidated or eager to impress to be authentic. As the weeks passed, Mary began timing her arrivals to coincide with John's, sometimes coming alone when Becca had other plans. They developed inside jokes, recommended books to each other, and eventually exchanged phone numbers in case one of them was going to be late on Tuesdays. Their text exchanges became a highlight of John's day. Mary sent him photographs of art projects her students created or funny observations from her classroom. He found himself sharing parts of his real life, disguised as hypothetical discussions or stories about friends in the business world. Meanwhile, Becca's treatment of John grew increasingly disdainful as she noticed his growing connection with Mary. What had been mere dismissal evolved into active rudeness, with deliberately excluding comments and eye-rolling whenever he spoke. "I don't understand why you waste time with him," John overheard Becca telling Mary one evening when he returned from the restroom. "You could do so much better." "Not everyone measures people by their bank accounts," Mary replied, an edge to her normally gentle voice. "John is kind, intelligent, and actually listens when I talk. That's worth more than a fancy job title." Becca scoffed. "That's such a teacher thing to say." "No offense, but some of us have ambitions beyond finger painting and story time. I want a partner who can match me, challenge me, take me places, literally and figuratively. And how's that working out for you?" Mary asked quietly. "That hedge fund guy lasted, 3 weeks? And the startup CEO before him? 2 dates. At least I have standards," Becca snapped. "Unlike some people who seem perfectly happy settling for mediocrity." John slipped back into his seat, pretending he hadn't heard the exchange, but the tension between the two friends was palpable for the remainder of the evening. As closing time approached, Becca left with barely a goodbye, while Mary lingered, apologetic. "I'm sorry about Becca," she said as they walked to the parking lot. "She's not usually so honest," John suggested with a wry smile. Mary sighed. "I was going to say rude, but I guess honest works too. She has good qualities, I promise. We've been friends since college, and she's been there for me through some really tough times. She just has these blind spots when it comes to what matters in relationships." "It's okay," John assured her. "Not everyone has to like me." As they reached Mary's car, an older model compact, she turned to face him. The parking lot lights cast a soft glow on her features, highlighting the genuine concern in her expression. "For what it's worth, I think she's missing out on knowing someone pretty special." Before John could respond, Mary quickly rose on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, then slipped into her car with a hurried goodnight. As he watched her drive away, John felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through his chest. And for the first time in months, it had nothing to do with Becca. The following Tuesday, John arrived at the Rusty Nail with uncharacteristic nervousness. His friendship with Mary had shifted into something undefined yet undeniably different, and he wasn't sure how to navigate the change. He'd spent the intervening week replaying their last conversation, the unexpected kiss, and the realization that his feelings for Becca had been overshadowed by something deeper and more authentic. His phone buzzed with a text from Mary. "Running late. Save me a seat." John was nursing his first beer when the door opened, not to reveal Mary, but to admit a client from his actual company. Harold Winthrop was the CFO of a manufacturing firm that had recently partnered with Zenith Enterprises on a major project. John had personally led the negotiations just last month. Recognition dawned immediately on Harold's face. "John Mills? My God, I barely recognize you." What are you doing in this place? Before John could formulate a response, Harold was approaching, hand extended. Harold Winthrop, Anchor Manufacturing. We just closed that distribution deal. What brings a man of your stature to this part of town? John forced a smile, acutely aware of Tony's curious gaze from behind the bar. Harold, good to see you. Just unwinding, enjoying a quiet evening. Harold laughed too loudly. Quiet is right. Never pictured you as the dive bar type. Man, wait until I tell the board I ran into John Mills slumming it in jeans and flannel. The Forbes 40 Under 40 cover boy, no less. John's mind raced. This chance encounter had just demolished the careful separation he'd maintained between his two lives. Harold, I'd appreciate some discretion. But Harold was already continuing, oblivious to John's discomfort. Discretion? Come on, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Everyone needs to escape the pressure, sometimes. Though I'm surprised, according to that profile they did last month, your idea of relaxation was sailing your yacht in the Greek islands, not. He gestured around the bar. This. The door opened again, and Mary entered, smiling when she spotted John, until she registered his tense expression and the animated man beside him. She approached cautiously. Everything okay? She asked. Harold turned, extending his hand to Mary. Harold Winthrop. I'm a business associate of Mr. Mills here. And you are? Mary Collins, she replied, confusion evident. I'm a friend of John's. Lucky woman. Friend of one of America's most eligible bachelors and successful entrepreneurs. Though he's being modest tonight, it seems. Harold laughed, checking his watch. Well, I won't intrude on your evening. John, my assistant will call yours about that golf game you promised. Pleasure meeting you, Miss Collins. With that, Harold departed, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Mary turned to John, her expression a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension. America's most eligible bachelor, she echoed. John sighed, gesturing to a quiet corner booth. I think we need to talk. Over the next hour, John revealed the truth about his identity, his company, and the reasons behind his charade. He explained his weariness with people who valued him only for his wealth, his desire for genuine connections, and his failed experiment in finding someone who could see beyond his bank account. Mary listened without interruption, her expression cycling through disbelief, understanding, and something unreadable. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So all this time, while Becca was dismissing you for not being wealthy enough, you were actually... She trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the thought. Yes, John admitted. I know it sounds ridiculous. It doesn't, Mary interrupted. It sounds lonely. The simple observation pierced through John's carefully constructed justifications. It was lonely, this double life. For all the authenticity he claimed to seek, he'd been lying to everyone around him. Are you angry? He asked. Mary considered the question. I'm processing. I understand why you did it, but I can't help wondering, would you ever have told me the truth if Harold hadn't shown up tonight? I've been thinking about it, John admitted. The more we talked, the more I wanted to share the real me with you, but I was afraid it would change things between us. It might, Mary acknowledged, not because of your money, but because trust matters to me. Relationships, even friendships, need honesty to thrive. Before John could respond, the door opened once more and Becca entered. Her gaze swept the room, landing on John and Mary in their secluded booth. She approached with a practiced smile. There you are. I was beginning to think you'd abandon our Tuesday tradition, she said to Mary before turning a coolly polite nod toward John. John. Becca, he replied, suddenly weary of the pretense. Mary glanced between them, a decision forming in her eyes. Becca, you remember John. John Mills, CEO of Zenith Enterprises. Becca's smile faltered. Very funny. She's not joking. John said quietly, That's who I am. Disbelief gave way to understanding as Becca connected the dots. Harold's loud conversation had attracted attention throughout the small bar. Her expression transformed, calculation replacing dismissal, as she processed the implications. I don't understand, she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Why would you hide something like that? All this time, pretending to be ordinary." The barely disguised disdain in her voice when she said ordinary confirmed everything John had suspected about her character. Still, he answered honestly, "I wanted to find someone who valued me for myself, not my bank account or business success." Becca laughed, the sound brittle. "But those things are part of who you are. You can't separate yourself from your achievements." She slid into the booth beside him, suddenly attentive. "We should talk more about this. Perhaps over dinner this weekend? I'd love to hear about Zenith's latest acquisitions." Mary stood abruptly. "I should go. It's getting late, and I have class preparation to finish." "Wait," John said, reaching for her hand. "Please don't leave." Becca's eyes narrowed as she observed the interaction. "Mary, don't be dramatic. John and I have some catching up to do. Adult conversation about business matters. I'm sure you understand." Something hardened in Mary's expression. "Actually, I understand perfectly." She turned to John. "I need some time to think. Good night, John." As Mary walked away, John felt panic rising. The one genuine connection he'd made was slipping away, while Becca pressed closer, her hand coming to rest on his arm. "Now that we've cleared up this little misunderstanding," she purred, "why don't we start fresh? I've always admired entrepreneurs with vision." John looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the practiced charm, the transparent shift in her demeanor now that she knew his true worth. He thought of Mary's quiet integrity, her genuine interest in his thoughts rather than his assets, her honest hurt at his deception. "There's no misunderstanding, Becca," he said, gently removing her hand from his arm. "You made your feelings about me very clear when you thought I was just a freelance designer. Finding out I'm wealthy doesn't change who I am as a person." Becca's expression hardened. "Don't be naive, John. Of course it changes things. Success like yours reflects character, determination, intelligence, all qualities I value in a partner. And kindness, honesty, the ability to see worth in people regardless of their bank accounts." John stood. "I'm sorry, Becca, but I need to go. There's someone I need to talk to." He found Mary in the parking lot, keys in hand, about to enter her car. "Mary, wait," he called. "Please, give me a chance to explain." "There's nothing to explain," she replied, her voice steady despite the hurt evident in her eyes. "You created a test that everyone around you was failing without even knowing they were being tested. Did it ever occur to you that authentic relationships require authentic behavior from both sides?" Her words struck home. "You're right," John admitted. "I was so focused on finding someone who wouldn't judge me for my wealth that I became the very thing I resented. Someone judging others based on how they responded to money or the lack of it." Mary's expression softened slightly. "Why did you keep coming back, especially after Becca rejected you? If the experiment failed, why continue the charade?" "At first, it was about Becca," John acknowledged. "I couldn't understand why she couldn't see past the surface. But then I met you. Someone who valued conversation over consumption, kindness over status. Someone who defended me to her friend not because she thought I had potential as a partner, but because she believed people deserve respect regardless of their income bracket." Mary was quiet for a long moment. "I need some time, John. This is a lot to process." "I understand," he said. "But before you go, no more lies, no more tests. Just honesty. I care about you, Mary, more than I realized until tonight. Whatever happens next, I wanted you to know that." Mary nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Good night, John." As she drove away, John turned to find Becca standing a few feet behind him, her expression thunderous. "You're choosing her? A kindergarten teacher who drives a 10-year-old Honda over someone who could actually understand your world." John smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. "I'm choosing someone who saw value in me when she thought I had nothing to offer but myself. Good night, Becca." 3 weeks passed without word from Mary. John continued his Tuesday ritual at the Rusty Nail, but the booth remained empty. Tony offered sympathetic glances, but little information. Mary had been in once or twice on different nights, alone, but hadn't mentioned John. Becca, meanwhile, had launched a campaign of reconciliation, suddenly appearing at charity events John attended in his CEO capacity, sending expensive gifts to his office, and somehow obtaining his private number to leave messages filled with business ideas and invitations. John ignored these overtures, his thoughts occupied with a woman who remained conspicuously absent. He considered reaching out directly, but respected Mary's request for time. Instead, he focused on reintegrating the compartmentalized aspect of his life, no longer hiding behind artificial distinctions between CEO John and regular John. The changes were subtle but significant. He maintained his Tuesday evenings at the Rusty Nail, but arrived in clothes that reflected his actual taste rather than a cultivated image of ordinariness. He engaged more openly with other patrons about his genuine interests and experiences, though still without broadcasting his wealth or position. The authenticity felt liberating. On the fourth Tuesday, as John was considering leaving earlier than usual, the door opened and Mary entered. She paused, scanning the room until her gaze landed on him. With a deep breath, she approached. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, gesturing to the stool beside him. "It's been reserved," John replied with a tentative smile. "For about 3 weeks now." Mary settled beside him, ordering her usual from Tony, who couldn't quite hide his pleased expression. "I've been thinking," she began after her drink arrived, "about trust and authenticity and second chances. And," John prompted when she paused, "and I realized something. While you weren't honest about your circumstances, you were honest about who you are, your values, your thoughts, the things that matter to you. The John who sat at this bar talking with me for hours wasn't a complete fabrication. He was just wearing different clothes." Relief flooded through John. "That's exactly it. The more time I spent with you, the more the lines blurred between my two lives. I found myself sharing things with you that I've never shared with anyone, just framed differently." "So," Mary said, meeting his gaze directly, "no more tests? No more separate lives?" "No more tests," John promised. "Just me, trying to figure out how to be authentic in a world that often makes that difficult." Mary nodded, satisfied. "In that case, I think we could start again. Hi, I'm Mary Collins. I teach kindergarten, love historical fiction, can't cook to save my life, and believe people are more than their job titles or bank accounts." John smiled, taking her outstretched hand. "John Mills, CEO by day, regular person by night, terrible at pool but willing to learn, and increasingly convinced that authenticity is worth the risk of disappointment." They began again, this time with all cards on the table. Their Tuesday meetings expanded to include dinners at restaurants both modest and upscale, weekend hikes, and quiet evenings discussing books or watching films. John introduced Mary to aspects of his business world gradually, not to impress, but to share an important part of his life. Mary approached this new dimension with characteristic thoughtfulness, neither intimidated by his position nor overly impressed by the wealth it afforded him. She was genuinely interested in understanding his work, asking insightful questions about business ethics and corporate responsibility that sometimes challenged his perspectives in productive ways. 6 months into their relationship, John invited Mary to a Zenith Foundation gala, their first official public appearance together. As they prepared to enter the ballroom, Mary squeezed his hand. "Nervous?" he asked. "A little," she admitted. "This is your world, not mine." "It's just one facet of my world," John corrected gently, "and I'm hoping it might become a small part of ours." The evening proved less daunting than Mary had feared. She charmed board members with her genuine interest in the Foundation's educational initiatives and offered practical insights that impressed even the most skeptical executives. John watched with pride as she navigated conversations with natural grace, neither trying to be someone she wasn't nor apologizing for who she was. The only discord came when Becca appeared, somehow having secured an invitation through a business connection. She approached them during cocktail hour, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "John, what a pleasure to see you in your natural habitat," she said, her gaze sliding dismissively over Mary. "And Mary, how brave of you to venture into this setting." "Becca," Mary acknowledged a composure that made John's heart swell. "How have you been?" The interaction was brief but illuminating. Becca's attempts to establish superiority through casual mentions of luxury brands and exclusive venues fell flat against Mary's unaffected confidence. When Becca finally moved on, Mary squeezed John's hand. "I think she's still trying to figure out what she missed about you," she observed. "Her loss, my incredible gain," John replied simply. As their relationship deepened, John was surprised to find Mary taking a genuine interest in Zenith's operations, particularly the Foundation's work in educational equity. What began as curious questions evolved into thoughtful suggestions, eventually leading John to invite her perspective on a new initiative supporting early childhood education in underserved communities. "This is what you're passionate about," he explained when she expressed surprise at his interest in her input. "Who better to help shape a program meant to reach children like your students?" What John hadn't anticipated was how Mary's practical experience and child-centered perspective would transform the Foundation's approach. Her insights led to programs that addressed real needs rather than perceived ones, initiatives that supported not just children, but the educators and families who shaped their worlds. Impressed by her contributions, John's board suggested creating a formal role for Mary as an educational advisor to the Foundation. The position would allow her to maintain her teaching job while leveraging her expertise to influence educational philanthropy on a larger scale. "I don't want you to feel pressured," John assured her when presenting the opportunity. "Our relationship and this offer are completely separate considerations." Mary considered carefully before accepting, establishing clear boundaries to maintain her independence both professionally and personally. She insisted on regular teaching hours to stay connected to classroom experiences that informed her recommendations and requested that her relationship with John remain private in professional settings to avoid perceptions of favoritism. Her principled approach earned respect throughout the organization, and within a year, the education initiatives she helped shape were showing measurable positive outcomes. Articles in education journals highlighted the innovative approaches, though Mary consistently redirected credit to the teachers implementing the programs. Meanwhile, Becca's initial rejection and subsequent attempts at reconciliation had sparked an unexpected period of reflection. The shock of discovering John's true identity had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about her values and relationship patterns. Although her first reaction had been calculation rather than contrition, the consistent rejection of her overtures gradually led to genuine introspection. One afternoon, nearly a year after John and Mary had begun dating, Becca requested a meeting with John at his office. "I'm not here to try to win you back," she began, surprising him with her directness. "I've finally accepted that ship has sailed, and frankly, I can see why you and Mary work. She's real in ways I'm still learning to be." "Why are you here, then?" John asked cautiously. Becca took a deep breath. "To apologize, first of all. The way I treated you when I thought you were just a struggling designer was inexcusable. But more than that, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "Your rejection forced me to look at myself, really look, and I didn't like what I saw. I've spent the past year working with therapists, examining why external markers of success became more important to me than authentic connections." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out childhood insecurity and a father who measured love and achievements make for some problematic adult relationship patterns." The conversation marked a turning point in their fractured friendship. While they would never be close, a civil relationship developed, particularly after Becca began dating a history professor whose modest income but intellectual passion represented everything she would have dismissed a year earlier. As for Mary and John, their relationship continued to deepen on foundations of mutual respect and genuine affection. John found in Mary a partner who challenged him to align his business practices with his personal values, while Mary discovered in John someone who supported her dreams without trying to reshape them according to conventional measures of success. 2 years after their reconciliation at the Rusty Nail, John proposed to Mary during a weekend trip to the small coastal town where she had grown up. Rather than an elaborate production with diamond-encrusted excesses, he asked her on a quiet morning walk along the beach she played on as a child, with a simple ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "This feels right," Mary said as she accepted both the proposal and the ring. "Just us, no spectacle." "Just us," John agreed, "though I can't promise the wedding will escape attention entirely. CEO Mary's kindergarten teacher is apparently headline-worthy in some circles." They compromised on a ceremony that reflected their shared values, meaningful rather than opulent, intimate rather than showy, but still acknowledging John's public position. The guest list included Tony from the Rusty Nail as John's best man, Mary's kindergarten students as enthusiastic flower throwers, and, somewhat surprisingly, Becca, who attended with her professor, and offered a genuinely warm congratulation to the couple. The wedding took place in Botanical Garden where John and Mary had spent their 5th date, with flowers in full bloom, providing natural decoration that required little embellishment. Mary wore a dress that favored elegant simplicity over extravagance, while John chose a well-tailored suit that struck a balance between his CEO wardrobe and his former, regular John attire. As they exchanged vows beneath a canopy of flowering trees, John reflected on the journey that brought them to this moment, his misguided experiment in deception, Becca's painful rejection, Mary's honest challenge to his methods, and the authentic connection that had ultimately flourished despite these inauspicious beginnings. "I promise to never again hide behind artificial divisions between who I am and who I present to the world," he vowed. "With you, I am simply myself. No tests, no personas, just us building a life together." Mary's eyes shimmered with emotion as she offered her own promises. "I vow to see you, all of you, not just the parts that are easy to love or convenient to acknowledge. Your success is part of who you are, just as your kindness and your occasional terrible jokes. I choose all of you as you've chosen all of me." The reception that followed was a celebration that honored both their worlds, elegant without being ostentatious, joyful without being excessive. Colleagues from Zenith mingled with Mary's fellow teachers, finding unexpected common ground in conversations about educational reform and the Foundation's initiatives. Becca approached the couple during the celebration, her expression reflective. "You know, if someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be genuinely happy for you both, I'd have assumed they were delusional," she admitted. "But here I am, and I truly am pleased for you." "Growth looks good on you, Becca," Mary said with sincere warmth. "It feels good, too," Becca replied, "though I still maintain some standards." She glanced meaningfully at her professor, who was engaged in animated conversation with one of John's board members. "He may not have a billion-dollar company, but he has a brilliant mind and a kind heart. Turns out those matter more than I realized." As Becca moved away, John squeezed Mary's hand. "Full circle," he observed. "Not quite," Mary corrected. "Circles end where they begin. I'd like to think we're all moving forward on a path instead." Later, as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, John held Mary close. "Any regrets about marrying a man who once lied about who he was?" Mary considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "No," she finally answered, "because that lie led to a deeper truth than either of us might have found otherwise. Sometimes we need to get lost before we can find our way home." "And have you found home?" John asked. Mary's smile was answer enough, but she put it into words nonetheless. "I have. It's not in your penthouse or my little apartment or even the house we're building. It's here." She placed her hand over his heart. "With you, wherever that takes us." In the years that followed their wedding, John and Mary built a life that balanced ambition with authenticity, success with significance. John continued to lead Zenith Enterprises, though with a shifted focus that prioritized sustainable growth and ethical practices over mere profit maximization. Mary divided her time between teaching and expanding the Foundation's educational initiatives, ensuring that her classroom experience continued to inform her philanthropic recommendations. Their story became something of a modern fairy tale in business circles, not because of its romantic elements, but because it challenged prevailing narratives about success, power, and compatibility. Profiles of their partnership inevitably highlighted the unconventional nature of their match. The billionaire CEO who fell for the kindergarten teacher who had initially befriended him when she thought he had nothing material to offer. What these profiles often miss, however, was the deeper significance of their relationship. The way it exemplified the possibility of connection across perceived divides, the importance of seeing beyond surface markers of worth, and the transformative power of being truly seen for who you are rather than what you possess. For John, the journey from deception to authenticity had fundamentally altered his approach to both business and personal relationships. The walls he constructed between different aspects of himself, CEO John, regular John, had crumbled, allowing for an integration that brought unexpected depth to all areas of his life. The irony, he reflected during an interview about Zenith's evolving corporate culture, is that I started that experiment thinking I needed to hide my wealth to find authentic connection. What I discovered instead was that I needed to reveal my authentic self, regardless of my financial status. This realization influences leadership style, making it more accessible to employees at all levels and more attuned to the human implications of corporate decisions. While still a hard-nosed businessman when circumstances required, he became known for an approach that valued transparency and genuine engagement over performative authority. Mary, too, found herself transformed by their relationship, though in less publicly visible ways. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through her work discovered that expanding her horizons didn't necessitate abandoning her core values or passions. Teaching will always be my first love, she explained to a former colleague who questioned her growing involvement with the foundation. But I've learned that influence takes many forms. The classroom remains my heart, but now I can also help shape systems that support thousands of classrooms. Her influence extended beyond educational initiatives. As John's partner, she brought a grounded perspective to social functions that might otherwise have devolved into exercises in status display. Her genuine interest in people rather than their positions created an atmosphere where authentic conversation flourished, even in settings typically dominated by superficial networking. Perhaps the most profound transformation, however, occurred in Becca. The woman who had once dismissed John based solely on his perceived financial limitations underwent a fundamental reevaluation of her priorities and patterns. I mistook ambition for greed, she confided to Mary during a rare moment of vulnerability at a foundation event. I thought wanting more meant wanting more things, more status. I'm learning that genuine ambition can be about impact, about growth as a person, about the depth of connections rather than their strategic value. Her relationship with the history professor continued to challenge her ingrained materialistic tendencies. There were difficult moments, conflicts when her conditioning to equate worth with wealth resurfaced, temptations to revert to familiar patterns of status seeking. Yet each time she chose connection over convenience, substance over surface, she found herself more satisfied than any luxury purchase had ever made her. This was perhaps the most powerful message embedded in the intertwined journeys of John, Mary, and Becca. The recognition that genuine worth transcends financial valuation, that authentic connection requires vulnerability rather than performance, and that true growth often begins with acknowledging our limitations rather than disguising them. For John and Mary, this understanding formed the foundation of their partnership. Not just romantic partners, but allies in creating a life defined by purpose rather than possession, impact rather than impression. The wealth that John had once feared would distort his relationships became instead a tool for manifesting shared values, for extending their influence beyond what either could accomplish alone. As they prepared to welcome their first child, this perspective shaped their discussions about parenting, about the world they hoped to create for the next generation. How do we raise a child with every material advantage to understand that those advantages are tools, not identity? John wondered aloud one evening, his hand resting on Mary's growing belly. The same way we remembered ourselves, Mary replied. By valuing connection over collection, by measuring worth in kindness rather than currency, by making sure they know their love for who they are, not what they have or what they achieve. This philosophy extended to their broader community as well. The Rusty Nail, where their story had begun, received an anonymous endowment ensuring it could weather economic downturns without sacrificing its unpretentious character. Tony, who had witnessed the entire saga unfold from behind his bar, found himself unexpectedly appointed to the board of a new initiative supporting small business ownership in underserved communities. Even the most cynical observers found it difficult to dismiss the authenticity of John and Mary's commitment to creating ripples of positive impact. Their actions spoke with consistency that transcended both John's initial deception and the fairy tale narratives that others tried to impose on their story. The lesson, ultimately, was not that wealth doesn't matter. It does, both in its presence and in its absence, creating realities that cannot be ignored. Rather, the message was that worth extends far beyond wealth, that seeing truly requires looking beyond surfaces, and that authentic connection demands the courage to be vulnerably, honestly oneself. 5 years after their wedding, John and Mary returned to the Rusty Nail for a private celebration on a Tuesday evening. Tony, now a part owner thanks to John's quiet investment, had closed the bar to regular customers for the occasion, welcoming only those who had been part of their journey, including, somewhat surprisingly, Becca and her now husband, the history professor. The small gathering represented the full circle of their story, from John's misguided experiment in disguise to the authentic community they had built together. The worn tables and humble surroundings remained unchanged, a deliberate choice despite offers of renovation funding, preserving the unpretentious atmosphere that had fostered genuine connections. As they raised glasses and toast, John reflected on the distance traveled from that first evening when he had noticed Becca and, almost as an afterthought, her friend Mary. If I could go back and tell myself one thing, he mused aloud, it would be that authenticity isn't found in hiding parts of yourself, but in integrating all of who you are, the successful and the struggling, the confident and the insecure, the parts you're proud of and the parts you're still working on. Mary squeezed his hand. And I tell myself to trust my instinct about people, that sometimes a quiet voice that says this person sees me matters more than louder voices suggesting more conventional paths. Becca, who had been listening quietly, offered her own reflection. I'd remind myself that the right person expands your world rather than fitting neatly into the box you constructed, and that growth often hurts before it heals. The conversation flowed naturally into reminiscences, laughter, and occasional moments of surprising vulnerability as each person acknowledged the ways their interconnected journeys had shaped them. There was no need for artificial divisions here, between CEO and teacher, between past and present, between the people they had been and those they were becoming. Later, as John and Mary walked home through quiet streets, they paused at a park bench overlooking the city lights. The same bench where, 3 years earlier, they had sat discussing names for their daughter, now a precocious toddler being doted on by her grandparents for the evening. Do you ever wonder how different things might have been? Mary asked, if Harold hadn't walked into the bar that night, if your secret had remained intact? John considered the question carefully. I think eventually the walls between my two lives would have become unsustainable. The more I cared for you, the more the division felt like a betrayal rather than protection. Still, Mary mused, it's strange to think that if Becca had seen beyond your disguise, if she had valued you for reasons other than your bank account, then I might never have discovered what truly matters. John completed the thought. I might have remained divided, compartmentalized, never fully known or knowing myself. The simplicity of this truth settled between them, that sometimes our greatest disappointments lead us to our deepest joys, that rejection can become redirection towards something more authentic, more aligned with our truest selves. As they continued their walk home, the city around them pulsed with ambition, with desire, with the endless pursuit of more. Yet in their quiet connection, in the life they were building together, John and Mary had found something rarer than wealth, more valuable than status. The profound richness of being fully seen, genuinely accepted, and deeply loved not despite who they were, but because of it. Their story would never fit neatly into conventional narratives about success or romance. It wouldn't translate easily into inspirational social media posts or simplistic morality tales. Its power lay precisely in its complexity, in its acknowledgement that genuine human connection transcends categories and calculations, that the heart recognizes value that spreadsheets cannot quantify. In the end, the billionaire had indeed hidden his heart, not behind his wealth or its absence, but behind the fear that his true self would never be enough. In finding the courage to reveal himself fully, he had discovered not just love but integration, not just partnership but wholeness. And in that discovery lay the most valuable lesson of all, that our worth is not determined by what we have or what we lack, by how others value us or how the world measures success. It resides instead in the courage to be authentically ourselves, in the willingness to see others with equal clarity, and in the quiet joy of building a life that honors both.